Alright, hello everyone and welcome to my, this time complete, Anthem review. You may have seen some of my previous Anthem videos. I won't dwell for too long on the topics mentioned there. You can have a look at them before watching this one if you like, but suffice it to say, I tried playing it on day one of the paid premium early access, and after about 9.5 hours of game time, my entire save broke and I could not continue playing. Finally, it was fixed with the day one patch a week later, so I picked it up again and decided to finish it and see if my opinion about it improves, because as I mentioned in this video, it wasn't quite high after the initial 10 hours. So after another 11 hours of play, yes, the game is not very long, I've officially finished it, and now I shall try to give you my thoughts about pretty much all aspects, but I'll mainly focus on the story-driven ones. And I'll have to say it right now, most of my opinions lean towards the negative. So before I continue, I have two things to say. First, if you're someone who's purely interested in the multiplayer side of the gameplay, even though I will be talking about it, this is probably not the best video to watch. And second, if you don't want to see any more negative reviews, as I understand such are most of the reviews of Anthem out there, feel free to stop watching this video and move on to something else. Alright, now let's begin. Boy, where should I start? Now that I mentioned negative reviews, I suppose I can start by saying that I have avoided absolutely any review materials about Anthem. I have not watched a single YouTube video or read a single article about it. And if I sound similar to other YouTubers or websites, I want you to know that I'm not just following a trend or something. This is purely my own opinion as someone who has been incredibly passionate about Bioware games in the past. In fact, they have always been among my favorite ones. I'm saying all of this because many have accused me of hating the game without knowing anything about it or doing it just for clicks and so on. Okay, now let's get to the meat of this video, Anthem. If you want to play Anthem, first I recommend getting an SSD. Not sure how optimized loading is on consoles, as I've played it only on PC, but even with the day one patch, there are quite a lot of loading screens, and they take quite a while to load. I'm running Anthem from an SSD myself, and I'm relatively fine with it, but I can imagine how frustrating it might get for people with HDDs, especially slower ones. So when you complete a mission, you first have to wait for a while until the mission ends. Then you get a loading screen before you go to the rewards screen. After you're done with the rewards, there's yet another loading screen that takes you back to the fort. If you then decide to open the forge and tinker in it, there is another loading screen for entering and one more for exiting the forge. Luckily those are shorter, and you do actually have the option to go from the reward screen directly to the forge, which does help. Initially I thought it was a weird option because the forge is right there in front of you as soon as you appear in the fort, but I imagine it's there to save time. Additionally, even though it's an open world game, there are quite a few instanced locations within the open world, so there will be loading screens for entering and exiting those as well. And so overall I'd say that the amount of loading screens and the length of the loading is definitely a negative point for Anthem. Other than the loading, however, the rest of the performance seems adequate. The game does look really good, especially certain aspects of it. The cutscenes are a big improvement over, say, Mass Effect Andromeda, most prominently the facial animations. There are a little weird animations here and there, or teeth that are a little too glowy, but overall it looks pretty good. So with all that said, and for the amount of particle effects that are often on your screen, I'd say that Anthem runs reasonably well. I'm also happy to say that I did not encounter any crashes, freezes, endless loading screens or game-breaking bugs after the day one patch. Not saying that they don't still exist, but for 11 hours after the patch I did not encounter any. While we're on a positive note, let's see what else is positive. The gameplay is generally fun. The proper piloting of the Javelin may take a few minutes to learn, but once you get the hang of flying and hovering and all that good stuff, it turns into a pleasant experience. Abilities and combos are fun to use as well. They seem meaningful enough. What I mean by that is I didn't get the feeling that my weapons were the only thing that mattered. and I like that. My favorite javelin was definitely the Colossus. It's really tanky, and I love that, especially for solo play. And I think it's time to go into some of the negatives for the gameplay, which I think can be boiled down to 2 points. Repetitiveness, if that's even a word, and bullet sponging, if that's even a term as well. For the amount of fighting you do in this game, there needs to be a larger variety of enemies. Many of them feel too similar to fight, and that often leads to boredom, as you keep waiting for more and more waves to spawn, for you to kill them the exact same way you did all the previous ones, and so on. Also, if you look at the bosses you encounter throughout the story, for example, other than the very final boss of the game, the Monitor, all other bosses are basically the exact same boss, the Titan. On some occasions, it would be a minor Titan, on others it would be a major one, but basically it's the same enemy, which you fight in the same way, and on top of it, it takes ages to defeat. I remember towards the end when I was fighting the biggest Titan, at one point my wife came from next room, wondering what I've been shooting at for the past 5 minutes and still isn't dead. And while the final boss is different than the rest, he is still very much a bullet sponge. But at least he has some variation, which is good. Now, let's talk about free play and multiplayer missions. First off, I'm not entirely sure why free play is strictly multiplayer, as every time I went into it, everybody was just doing their own thing, usually farming materials or grinding out the challenges that are required for you to progress through the story. So unless you're grouped with friends, don't expect much in terms of multiplayer experience from this mode. Additionally, the random quests that pop up during free play are as generic as they come. Collect 5 things and bring them to the thing while waves of enemies are attacking. Go to the thing and protect it while waves of enemies are attacking, and so on. Sometimes they even share the same assets with the quests of the main story. As in, during the main story, you happen on a giant walker that's broken down and you have to repair it, at least partially, in order to access some info that's stashed in it. Of course, while fighting enemies. And then during free play, you'll encounter a giant walker once again with waves of enemies attacking it, and you have to do something with it, and it's basically the same thing. It may in fact be literally the same, I'm not entirely sure, but you get where I'm going with this. As far as I can tell, the best multiplayer experience is any activity that isn't free play and that isn't a mission that is part of the main story. Why not part of the main story, you might ask? Well, it's because you will then have to experience it at the pace of the fastest or the least patient among the players, and that's not something I personally enjoy. Once again, being in a group of friends may be an exception here. And so there seems to be an ongoing theme about playing this game with a group of random people. And usually it's not the most fun of experiences. So if you want to have a satisfying multiplayer experience, the way I see it, play with at least one person who is your friend or is grouped with you, or at least you share the same vision or goal or something. Just don't play with complete randoms. And it's not necessarily the people's fault, I'd say it's also partially the game's fault for not encouraging a more cooperative experience. Right, what should I talk about next? There's a crafting and scavenging system in addition to gathering and straight up buying crafting reagents. So far I haven't seen anything particularly bad there, it works fine. There are of course microtransactions which I think are not worth purchasing, but that's for you to decide. Now let's mention the grinding. There is a point in the story where you actually have to stop progressing through it until you complete a set of challenges. They include doing various things which would normally be achievements, like killing a bunch of enemies with your ultimate and your melee attacks, and looting chests and killing rare enemies, doing multiplayer missions, repairing friendly javelins, executing combos, that sort of thing.
Aspirant, you stand before the resting place of Legionary Venia. Guardian of the Dawn, you have been judged and found wanting.
I did not like it mainly because it serves no real purpose other than being a time gate. You could argue that it forces you to explore the world and the game's content in general, which isn't such a bad thing, but it could certainly be done in better ways. One example I can think of right now is, instead of forcing you to stop 1/3 of the way into the main story and grind before you can continue, they could have given you the Temple Challenges quest very early on, maybe soon after the beginning of the story, and asked you to complete it until a certain point, maybe let's say somewhere in the middle. This way it could have been seen as something of an ongoing exploration tutorial. It would have perhaps encouraged players to do a little bit more stuff in the open world. You know, look for a rare chest here and there, stop to do a random objective that you would perhaps normally not stop to do, take part in more multiplayer activities, or experiment with killing enemies in various ways, maybe even gather the kind of crafting materials that you will later need for something, and all of that while slowly contributing to the quote grind without it feeling as forced as it does right now. So a missed opportunity right there. Another thing that I didn't like is the quest tracking. For an open world game, it is far too linear, far too specific. Instead of showing you where to go on the map or in which direction you should generally try to move, it shows you exact spots on your screen where you have to go. You know, it says go to this river, then go over the waterfall, then fly between the trees, then down the ravine, and just leads you by the nose. Even though this is an open world game where you can fly, you know, it's three-dimensional open world, if you follow the quest tracker it feels just as linear as say Dragon Age 2. Anyway, with all that said, I think I'm done talking about the gameplay, and now I can finally focus on the story-driven aspects of the game. And generally, things do not look pretty. In my initial video after 10 hours with the game, I said how much I was reminded of Mass Effect Andromeda by the way most of the story is delivered. Let me play a clip. The bulk of it is just you going out in the world with Sam or Owen telling you where to go, what to do, who to kill, what to loot, what the thing that you just looted means, and just everything. That is how the bulk of the story happens in the game. And that holds true pretty much until the end. There are a few good cutscenes, but they're definitely a minority. However, let's not mention Andromeda anymore and focus on Anthem. I suppose my biggest problem with the story is the main character and the main villain. Perhaps I should call them the protagonist and antagonist. Those two are, without a shadow of a doubt, the worst in any Bioware game to this date. They have next to no growth or development of any kind. Let's take the bad guy first, the Monitor. Darth Maul is a complex character compared to him. We literally see him twice. He claims he can kill us but just walks away, then traps us and literally does nothing. The second time we see him, he's just a hologram and it's an exchange of silly lines like "get glitched."
Get glitched.
At one point, I thought he would simply turn out to be the muscle, while the true mastermind would turn out to be Owen, as at least he had something that's a little interesting going on. But I think they wasted his character by turning him good once more in the end of his story and then completely removing him from the game. Okay, so perhaps the game is not about the bad guys, you might say, it's about us, the main character, the protagonist. Well, sadly, we're just as bad in this department. You could replace the Freelancer with a really powerful remote-controlled javelin, give Faye the remote control, and hardly anything would change. Just like the Monitor, our character does not grow at all. His only struggle is to kill more enemies that are thrown at him. Once again, there could have been something done with his relationship with Owen perhaps, but no. And of course, we have absolutely zero choices to make throughout the main story. Not a single one that I remember, at least. The only choices that are given to us are in out-of-cutscene secondary dialogue, which have no impact on the main story, and the choices ultimately change nothing as far as I'm aware. The extent to which they differ is usually, let's say, a guy tells you a story of what they've done, and we have two choices. Choice number 1, to tell him that he did the right thing and that he should be proud of himself, or choice number 2, to say that he should have thought twice and perhaps he'll regret what he did. And so, yes, the protagonist was a big letdown. The two characters that actually go through something interesting and ultimately grow and develop as a result are these two. They were, in my opinion, much better suited to be the main characters of the game. And I suppose in a way, they are. If instead of our guy, we played as Haluk, things could have been far better in my opinion. He was great once, but now he's broken, starts off at a real low point and manages to rise up towards the end. He's very determined to succeed, very hot-headed, but also very emotional and just a much better candidate for a protagonist. And that is once again my opinion, of course, but I feel very strongly about it. Faye is more interesting as well. She had some genuinely good interactions with Haluk, and if we were playing as him, we could have also had choices to make, which in turn would have improved the interactions even further. There could have even been a romance, who knows. Of course, in that case you would not have the option to play as female, but oh well, is that really that necessary? And I suppose if they wanted to put the work into it, they could have made an alternative version of the story for a female protagonist in which Haluk would be the cipher and Faye the broken freelancer, or something like that. And anyway, that was my biggest problem with the story. The rest is minor stuff in comparison, but still important. Let's see what I should mention next. The atmosphere in the fort, for example. We are in the middle of some of the most hostile territory imaginable. Between dangerous wildlife, evil Dominion bad guys, freaking titans, shaper magics that can do anything, lack of freelancers and other protectors and so on. And so people in the fort should be scared and troubled and perhaps panicking, or at least in a hurry. Instead, everything and everyone is so chill. They're listening to music, they're having drinks and walking slowly and joking around, as if life is perfectly fine. And to me, this atmosphere just didn't fit. Also, people have said that this is the spiritual successor of Mass Effect, and judging by some of the names involved in Anthem's development, I can totally see that. However, unlike Mass Effect, which tried to be a fairly cohesive science fiction, this one is by comparison a complete fantasy. Between the Anthem of Creation, the Cenotaph, the Heart of Rage, the Cataclysms, the whatever devices they were called, the Shaper Storms and the Shaper Relics and the splitting of bodies and personality decays and freaking monster transformations and teleportations and warping or whatever that is that causes enemies to spawn out of thin air and whatever it is that ciphers do. Half the time I've no idea what's going on or what people are talking about, and I just think it's too much. Oh, and here's a question. So we got to the temple of General Tarsis, and inside we go through all of these extensive trials to finally reach the end. And as we do, we hear that something's not quite right back at our walker. You know, where Faye and Haluk and Owen are?
Something's wrong here. What? Faye? Haluk? I can barely hear you. Faye, you seeing this? Faye, are you there?
Then 5 seconds later, Owen just appears next to us and disables our javelin.
That's a shame.
How the fuck, forgive my language, did Owen get here? Oh my god, who designed this? Was it the same people who designed the Crucible?
Who designed it?
You would not know them, and there is not enough time to explain.
Get glitched.
Oh dear. So yeah, I think that's all I had to say about Anthem. Sadly, the bad outweighs the good. I think at some point they had something good in mind when making this game, but it was lost. Did they think that flying in a javelin is so cool that the game needs little else? I don't know. It's unfortunate that all these years of work from what are apparently the best people at Bioware resulted in this, after all the good games that they've made. And I know there will be updates, and perhaps it eventually becomes something better, but for now, I'm left wanting, especially in the story department. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to give it a like, and perhaps enable notifications for my channel if you'd like to catch my uploads in time. Don't forget to tell me what you think about the game and about my review in general down below. And until the next video, stay tuned and be good.